Yeah, welcome to the inaugural episode of Jack the Last podcast, where we're recapping BBC HBO's Gentleman Jack, and generally here to have a gay old time. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Kelsey.
Oh, we're excited. We're finally making this happen.
I want to say, live from New York, it's Jack the Last pod. We're in New York right now. Carrie lives here. I live in North Carolina. But we're here to record the first episode of the podcast, the first 2 or 3 episodes, actually. But we're here, we're queer, we're ready to talk about Jack the Last podcast. We're in the hiatus time. I know it's super dry. We're all thirsty for content. So,
thirsty.
Here we are to talk about Gentleman Jack.
Yes, a show that means a lot to us personally, and many people all over the internet who have very much, particularly queer women, but also just a lot of people who enjoy a really fantastic romantic period drama with a lot of like suspense, fantastic costumes, all that jazz. So yeah, so we're here to get started. So I guess we should start off with like why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah. So I will let you go first.
Sweet deal. So basically what attracted me to the show was like, you know, I was an English major. I love any sort of historical drama of any, whether it's, you know, Reign, which, you know what, I should not have led with Reign as a historical drama because nothing about that is real at all.
Accurate.
Not at all. But like the Borgias, Downton, we're both huge Downton fans. So yeah, I heard the show and I heard lesbians in 19th century England, and I was 110% on board. I started watching it, and then we got to that amazing title sequence, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. But that was the moment I was 110% sold on the show, and I watched. I think it was one of the few shows I was keeping up with. Yeah. Week to week. In most shows I do not. I'll just like binge them all when they're done, or like get a year or two behind, or like 4 or 5 years behind in the case of like how I got with Game of Thrones at one point, and Jane the Virgin, which I still haven't finished. But yeah, so basically with this show, I was keeping up week to week, and I like had no one to talk about it with, and I saw on Twitter that you were tweeting about it. A couple other queer friends that we know were tweeting about it. And so I was like, I do not have enough like people I could talk about this with in my day-to-day life. So I hit you up and was like, will you please like do this with me and talk to me about it?
I got a DM on Twitter saying, how do you feel about doing I got a DM on Twitter asking, how do you feel about doing a Gentleman Jack podcast? And I was like, I am very interested in doing that. So
yeah, and then here we are.
Yeah. And the reason that I am in this podcast, I mean, obviously I love the show, but for me, I think we both have different reasons that we like the show. I think a lot of them are the same, but for me, I just relate to Ann Lister on like a spiritual level. I saw like a lot of myself in her, and I really understand like all the moments and her heartbreaks and stuff that really, really resonated with me. So for me, it was just finally feeling seen in a piece of media, like truly seen. And then I'm also like a humongous history buff. I love anything to do with English history. And I saw the trailer. A girl I know wrote about it. And I watched the trailer, and I was like, I've got to watch this show. I think it took me until episode 2 to like remember to watch it. But once I did, like, I was 110% into it.
Yeah, no, it gets you like fast and furious.
Yeah.
But it was the sort of thing also in terms of a podcast, it's like everyone's doing like the go-to like sort of creative outlet of millennials, I guess, and to some extent Gen Z, you know, is like, we're all doing podcasts now. But at the same time, I was like, this is, it's a sort of community thing, right? You know, of people who care about a often very niche thing that you also care about. And there were not terribly many in Gentleman Jack podcast when the show was initially airing. I think AfterBuzz did one, and there were a couple ones that kind of sprung out immediately after. Yeah. And like, you know, and they were all, and I listened to pretty much all of them. And then the ones that I didn't know about, you sent me, and then I started listening to those too. You know, but it was the sort of thing where I was like, no one was quite talking about the show in the ways that 100, you know what I mean? Or that were 100% the things that I felt like I was noticing or I wanted to pick up on, because there's like some podcasts didn't quite have the historical context. And so like some of the like lingo, people were like, oh, interpreting it as this. I'm like, no, I understand why you think, but it's like the sort of thing where it's like, if you don't watch a lot of period dramas and you don't know like the idea of like, oh, my man, I need to go get a man. Like one of the podcasts that I was listening to, they're like, oh, she needs like a husband. I was like, no, they mean like her serving man.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not the, but I'm like, obviously, you know, if that's not a part of history, you spend an inordinate amount of your day-to-day life thinking about, there's obviously no reason you would pick that up. But then there are also things that even in, you know, and their podcasts, and some of them were done by people who, you know, were not that queer people or people who do not identify as some type of queer, obviously they do have just as valid, obviously, observations on any sort of show, but I sort of think there were some nuances missing that I kind of wanted to hear about. But then, you know, even within the queer podcast, there were other nuances that like I kind of wish they were talking about, you know, and obviously we're two women of color, and we're also both, you know, Christian, religious, you know, and so like there are things that I feel like in particularly as we get towards the end of the season, with the importance of like the sacrament and, you know, I wanted people to talk about how, you know, and Lister's faith, but also like how weirdly for being as, you know, quote unquote, progressive, you know what I mean? Or it's like, we think of like someone who is okay with queerness as being super progressive, but it was like, no, she was okay with it kind of for herself and for people who were like her, but like she doesn't, the way in which the empathy extends and doesn't extend. So it was like, for me, I was just like, oh, I want to like talk about this with someone who also knows a lot about history and the culture of the period, but also can talk to, you know, the race and the gender and the queer stuff, in the ways that like, I felt like I was getting bits and pieces from all these other shows. And I just kind of wanted to reach out to you and like collaborate with someone who had a similar like itch to scratch or wanted to have the same conversations that I wanted to have about the show.
No, I was full on ready to write some like blog post articles about the show because there were so many moments I was like, that right there is perfect. I've never seen a TV show speak to that issue in queerness, speak to like so many different little tiny things. So there's definitely a part of me that wanted to talk about it, and I'm glad we're getting the chance to now on the internet. So very happy to be doing this. Yeah,
let's do it. So should we start? So our first shot of the series of Gentleman and Jack are, we see two carriages on a very, very tiny, narrow road, passing each other, one of them at a normal pace. And inside we see Ann Walker and her relative, also named Ann Walker, sitting inside, and who are abruptly jostled out of the way by like this like furiously this like Fast and Furious driver whose face we do not see. We only see, I believe, the back of him as he like basically almost very narrowly runs them off of this very tiny road. And immediately, you know, like their carriage is like somewhat damaged, I believe. And so they immediately go to the nearest house for like repairs and to like assess the situation and make sure they're all okay. Turns out to be none other than Shibden Hall, home of Ann Lister. And the first member of the Lister family that we encounter is Marian, her younger...
AKA Yara Greyjoy.
Yes.
Everybody wants to know that is the same actress.
Oh, yes.
The same actress, if that shows you
Gemma Whelan, who is absolutely everything in the show.
Yeah, Yara Greyjoy comes out to help save the day.
And she does handing them emergency consolatory booths. And they're like, oh, you have so much presence of mind, just like your sister. And the way her shoulders fall and she looks so irritated in that moment. You know, she's just like, And then they start talking about like, what a presence Miss Lister is, I'm referring to Anne. And they're like, you know, like, oh, you know, she's so interesting. And she's, actually, and you see Ann Walker kind of initially like, be like, oh, trying not to look like too interested and too invested. And they are, and so you kind of get the sense of like, this is a person with a lot of presence and that everyone in this room knows to some degree or knows of by reputation, and like either sort of cowers like, or like kind of has a certain amount of like awe for or annoyance with.
Yeah.
And that kind of is just such a wonderful setup for this character who then is immediately introduced driving a different carriage as manically through the streets of Halifax, to the point where there are like multiple men on the cart, in the carriage as well, who all like come out and they look like they have sea legs.
Yeah.
Or like staggering to say they're like could not get out of the carriage fast enough. And she's like, oh, well, my driver was, don't have a driver. I decided to do it. And the first thing that happens is her maid opens the carriage door and immediately vomits.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, cool. Vomit takes.
Yeah. Which we think to mean, oh, she's just seasick, but little do we know.
There's a little more there.
There's a little more there. And also, too, it's somebody that's not white, which you don't normally see in period dramas.
Yeah, it's very, she appears to be like biracial and and entirely francophone, French speaking only. Which I thought it was nice to see for once a person of color in, a 19th century period.
Yeah, the only other one I've really seen them in that they play a prominent character is the Spanish Queen on Starz.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some black characters in it.
Which is so bizarre to me because it's like not...
That aren't like slaves.
No, that are not
like,
or background extras,
yeah.
but I'm like, there was a significant like black population in England at the time. Probably not as far north as Halifax, like, but there were black people there, like not even beyond like, by this time, if slavery hasn't been outlawed yet, it's very, very close to being, or, it's kind of like going through the courts and being sort of overturned one step at a time. But like just generally, there was a good amount of like free black people around. And granted, having spent a little bit of time in the north of England, like there's not a ton.
Yeah.
But I was just like, even for the rest of the series, I'm like, I was surprised I didn't even see any really background talent apart from Eugenie.
As we get into season 2 and we know that they traveled widely
through
after
Europe.
they were married,
yeah.
I'm interested to see how they bring in that, because I do think people that write this show are pretty woke. So I feel like I'm interested to see if, they go to Paris, which I know they do. Will we run into people of color and people like that? So,
and especially like to Italy, like places that have like a long history of like North African, like, traveling,
Italy,
commerce.
Spain. I don't think they went to Spain, but I might be wrong. I really don't know, except a few places I've read about. But I know they went to Paris and lived in Paris for a while when she was finger banging Maria Barlow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, this is it.
Hey, this is what's going to happen in this podcast. I didn't say anything crude. It's still ad friendly.
It is sponsors. It is what happened.
Yeah. So, she lived in Paris for a while when she was with Maria Barlow. So.
Yes. Which we will get to. We're in episode 2 and 3, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she gets back home. Ann Lister comes home. And kind of the first thing she does is like, okay, she is a landowner. And, that entails like collecting rents, managing her finances. And she basically immediately is like, okay, who is doing the account? And she finds out the person who has been doing the accounts for her is like super ill, and he has like dropsy, but also like his leg is like full on like gangrenous.
That is a side effect of dropsy, sores and ulcers. Yeah.
Are you explain what dropsy is for?
I don't have the official definition in front of me, but I can get it. Hold on.
I was just gonna say like a layman's.
Dropsy, as far as I know, is, I'm looking it up now. It's like a heart.
Like inflammation.
Disease. Yeah, hold on. Old-fashioned or less technical term for an edema.
What's an edema? We're getting there. You heard it here, folks.
So medicinenet.com. An old term for swelling of soft tissues due to the accumulation of excess water.
That doesn't sound good.
That's the person that have edema due to congestive heart failure.
Oh, congestive heart failure, which is
so
like
when you have congestive heart failure, you take on fluid, and then I guess dropsy comes from there. So yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, edema is more prominent in the lower legs and feet toward the end of the day as a result of pooling of fluid from the upright position, usually maintained during the day. Upon waking from sleeping, people can have swelling around the eyes, referred to as periorbital edema. boom.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
So
dropsy was a common thing back then.
Yeah. Well, this is when you don't believe in germs and you don't wash your hands, as well as also just generally heart disease is just a thing.
Yeah.
Which you can't catch. So like the combination thereof was not great at the time. So basically Anne goes to try and figure out how to, what the state of the finances are. We get the feeling that she's come back from Hastings.
Yeah.
And her dad alludes, it's like, oh, there's always some drama over there. But then they like kind of everyone hastily like changes the subject.
Yeah.
And it's sort of thing you always, this character obviously we'll talk about a lot more, but it's very interesting. It was like, how much of any given situation does he know? Because he's also like half deaf, and also, which is why they like are shouting at him in most episodes. Yeah. But then also he's kind of very like half aware of any given situation, but also will make jokes that are like, you don't actually know what's going on. He definitely wouldn't know because Anne wouldn't tell him this specific detail because she kind of only confides in her in Auntie Anne. Yeah. But then he like kind of gets it right on the money. Yeah. For things like that. And he was right. He was 100% right.
Yeah, I don't think he's done. I mean, he's been dealing, that's her father. He's been dealing with her from birth. Yeah. And she's always had the spirit that she has. So, I don't think it's anything new for him. He's just like, okay, again, like kind of rolling his eyes about it. I don't think he neither approves or disapproves. He's just like resigned to it. Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel about him.
And the thing that, and to spin off of that, it's like he is not the head of the estate, she is. Yeah. And that was a very deliberate choice by his own brother, I believe. I
think it was his brother.
Yeah, his brother who owned, and they were, and a thing that is discussed earlier or later in this episode is like, they were the poorer relations of this cousin or this brother who immediately decided to, in his will, give it to not her father, Anne Lister herself, and not even on contingent on marriage or any sort of thing. They're like, this estate is yours because, and he saw that she had the wherewithal to manage it. And we see as she comes back and is like, my father has kept accounts in like little slips of paper. Do you actually have the records? And her ailing servant like hands over this massive booklet, and she goes through and is like, okay, I have to be the one to collect the rents. And she like looks pointedly at her dad at the dinner table, like, who will do it? And she's like, well, someone has to. And then all the women look away. Auntie Anne and Marian are like, well, obviously not us. She looks at her father, is like, someone has to. He looks away, and she's like, guess it's me then. So it's like, you can't complain about it because like it needs to be done. This is how we live, to collect our tenants' coin.
Yeah, I think for me, that was this kind of like first 10, 15 minutes we're getting to see her. We're really seeing like her, if nobody else is going to do it, I'll do it, from driving the carriage to saying she's going to collect the rents. Yeah. It's kind of like this like big butch energy of just like, if nobody else can do it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right. And I just love that energy. She comes in kind of like full force. Like, it's almost like you can't get a breath in terms of narratively because she's just, like, moving so fast from the like second she walks through the door.
Figuratively and literally, because she just cuts her way across each and every room. The Butch walk is, like, one of the best, like, little character touches that Saran Jones really gives us series.
Yeah, Sally Wainwright and Saran Jones, who plays Anne Lister, really worked a long time on developing her walk, her cadence and her voice, the way she spoke, the ums and the ahs and stuff, with these little tiny details were like really carefully considered, and it comes through, the second she comes on camera.
It really does. And we'll zoom in more on like specific elements of her performance as we go, because like you can't, when you see it, if you haven't seen the show, first of all, why are you listening to this? Unless you're like my mom or like a friend of us personally. But if you should 110% watch the show, because it is beautifully done on every level, like in terms of how it's shot, written, directed, performed. The music, which we will dive into more, is absolutely stunning. But these like little character details that Sophie Rundle, who plays Anne Walker, and Saran Jones, who plays Anne Lister, bring to these characters is just wow.
And it's because they had a lot of rehearsal time too. Yeah, they had a lot of time to prep for the show, which for television is very, very uncommon.
No, you do not get for a limited series either, where they're all shooting it at once. More or less.
So it's really, and it took like 8 months to film it. So they really had enough time to get this perfect.
And to get to know each other and build that sort of chemistry.
As Anne Lister and Anne Walker are building their relationship on camera, also Saran Jones and Sophie Rundle were building theirs because they didn't know each other before.
Yeah.
So it was, it's
That's
just
an
a really
interesting
cool
parallel.
thing to see. Yeah. I saw it in an interview with Saran Jones.
Oh, so great.
I'm very well versed on like all the behind the scenes information.
You really are, yeah. And also you are someone who works in production day to day, so like you know your stuff and you know what you're looking at here. But yeah, so jumping back into the world of the story, we get some downstairs servant drama. Much in the fashion of Downton Abbey, we have an upstairs storyline, a bit of downstairs storyline, and then like tertiary plots. And so in this one, Eugenie is throwing up at 10 a.m. and the head servant, Elizabeth Cordingley. Yeah. I always think of her in my head as Elizabeth, but I'm like, there's other characters in the show named Elizabeth too. And I'm like, oh man, y'all gotta name your kids anything else. But yeah, Cordingley was like, why are you day drunk at 10:30 in the morning? And Eugenie like takes a breather from vomiting, like puts a finger out, was like, wasn't drinking. And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, oh, are you pregnant? And she's like, yeah, it was George, the groom, who was shot out of the tree. And the way this anecdote is relayed in the first 5 minutes of the show, I'm like, is this meant to be a joke or played for laughs?
No, it
like,
really happened.
Yeah.
And that was true. I have the book and that did happen.
Why was he
But here's
shot?
the thing about Eugenie. She didn't come on as her lady's maid till she came back. The whole pregnancy stuff is all a narrative
device to create a downstairs
narrative agency. Like it's not Eugenie didn't become her. Wow, my microphone's been down. How long has my microphone been down?
Just like a minute, because you turned it down.
Yeah. Sorry, Eugenie didn't come in like in reality until. Oh, Lord have mercy. Jesus H. Okay. Okay. So yeah, in reality, Eugenie did not come into the picture until later. She wasn't her lady's maid at this point. She and like Thomas Beach came in earlier or later. Basically, like the timing in the show is not accurate to what actually happened.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, there was no Eugenie that wasn't pregnant, and also she wasn't throwing up because of the baby. She was throwing up because she was drunk.
Oh, she was like...
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
She was basically trying to like abort the child by like drinking a bunch.
That's what it was. Yeah. Well, no, I assumed it was just morning sickness.
No, she had like literally drank like
a ton of gin
like
too,
a thing
as
of
an
gin
abortion.
because it said that later.
Oh, okay. I thought that was a thing that happened, but I assumed that was like later. They're like, oh, did she, figure it out? And they're like, no, she tried that and it didn't work.
Yeah, no, she was definitely like throwing up because she'd been drinking.
Oh man. And so yeah, that is revealed that she was, secretly engaged to Anne Lister's like previous groom, who his death. It's presented. Which I'm like, what? In what way?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, if he was trying to get the birds out of the tree, but then, like, their gamekeeper, shot, and then, like, he wasn't in the right spot, and then he got shot. I'm pretty sure George Playforth did die because of that, but in terms of, like, Eugenie and him having, like, a love child, that's not true.
That's not. Okay. And so very much immediately she realizes she's in not a good predicament, and for the time that she's living in, and the two other servants are like, like they were like talking to each other in English, and Eugenie, you kind of get the sense that she understands English but just can't communicate in it.
Yeah.
Because every time someone's talking about her or mentions her name, she looks up immediately and like can kind of glean what is being said. But in this one, she's like, "Oh, I should tell Miss Lister," and they both go, "Why? Pourquoi? Like, why?" And they're like, "No, you like cannot tell her because she will dismiss you right away." And I'm like, that is. It's like the worst possible situation to be in is like, yes, you're an unmarried, woman about to, have a kid. And now the one person who is within the power to help you out would, throw you out in disgrace. And so like, you definitely do get the sense of stakes here for this character, but also just generally for women in this time, whether they were working class or not, it was just like a sort of very tenuous situation.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll
even today,
a
woman having a baby, I don't know, we're still not 100% like kosher.
Oh, yeah. It's like people, have still yet to learn to mind their own business.
Yeah.
But it's the sort of thing where it's like, this is a fireable offense.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And particularly because it was with a member of another staff member that this woman, that Ann Lister oversaw. So...
It's not an Anna and Mr. Bates situation.
No.
No.
Mr. Bates. Long live Anna. I will say... Tangent, she should have left him because, like, her life was so good until he came to her life. I'm like, Anna, you could find a nice gal or gentleman if you must. But I'm like, Mr. Bates just has so much baggage to this.
Let's do that. And then I want to go back because the scene with Eugenie in the kitchen with Cordingley, we see this situation differently in that. So Eugenie's like, you know what Miss Lister gets up to with other women.
Oh, yes. Oh, how did I skip that? Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes. Okay, so, yes, please set us up.
Yeah. So we're there in the scene we were just talking about.
You're like, she should understand my situation.
She should understand because you know what she gets up with you know what she gets up to with other women. And Cordingley's face, I honestly read that as like, she didn't realize. Because people did not think about that back then. That wasn't even a question. Like, nobody thought about two women, boning back then.
It was all because, male homosexuality...
was illegal.
It was, quote-unquote, anti-buggering laws, or bugger. Yeah. It was the name of, anti-sodomy laws. Yeah. Were existed on the books. That is mentioned in the show and is 100% historically correct.
But women, they didn't even think about it, that would be a possibility. So I feel like that's Cordingley's first time being like, oh. Even though she was her lady's maid in Paris when she was with Maria Barlow, and they
during the height of her hotation.
Which we find out in episode 2, they were doing it in the middle of the day, completely naked, both of them. So that was they were just asking to be walked in on.
I mean, I wouldn't say asking to be walked in, but it would be a harder to explain situation.
Not nightgowns on.
You have no plausible deniability at that point.
So I do understand what you were saying, that it's hard for you to believe that she doesn't know. But I just think people did not think that way, and a servant's job was to just
be discreet
and just do what you were told. And Ann Lister's smart enough too to not let her servants know what she's up to.
I don't know. Eugenie was like, I know. And then, literally, when she said it, Cordingley's face dropped. My interpretation was oh, so she knows these things too. And this is also dangerous knowledge to have about someone and about your employer, because, if any of them even gave the faintest hint of, knowing what was going on, they would be dismissed immediately, because that's a liability.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the other servant who's clearly, a kitchen-only servant. Yeah, Hemingway, who's very much
Ernest Hemingway.
What is she? She's very much oh, what did she say? And Cordingley goes, nothing. My interpretation, she very much was we will not discuss this.
No, I took it as she just, the everything connected. The puzzle pieces came together, and she was oh. And so she's dealing with this. But then, obviously, no spoiler alert, but, it doesn't ever get brought up again. So it was kind of this plot thing that was brought up and never really discussed with
how aware the servants are.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure will come up in, season 2.
When her and Anne Walker and her live in the same house. Yeah. Technically she had a bedroom next to hers, but they never slept separately. They slept in the same bed.
So so we get back to her diary entry about her and her relationship with Miss Hobart, which you can shed a little more light on. Just watching it purely from the show, we're led to believe that they have some sort of affair.
So for Anne, Vera Hobart was everything she was looking for in a woman. Well-to-do, had a title, didn't have a title, but was well-to-do, had a social standing, socially higher than she was. Basically everything she wanted. Anne always wanted to be a well-to-do rich girl, and she had money. She was not poor by any means, but she wasn't as rich as Vera Hobart, Anne Walker, some of these other
She was
ones.
On the lower end of landed, you would say. Yeah.
So she always wanted more, and when she came back, she said in her journal that, I feel that I have been an Icarus. I've flown too close to the sun, which is what she felt like when she was with Vera Hobart, who she met in Paris and was hanging out with all these really rich, fancy people. And she was she basically got too far away from herself and who she really is. So she goes back up to Shibden, that's the story starts. But her and Vera Hobart, as far as I know, did not have sex or anything. It wasn't a full-blown relationship. It was flirtation, and I think, Anne got to kiss her some and feel her up, but it wasn't anything super graphic or as important as her relationship becomes with Ann Walker.
And that's the thing that we get to a bit more in episode 2, where it's like, you can see that Veer very much like valued Anne in her life, but it still wasn't, but it was like, I'm sorry, I'm not, in the line that she says, like, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, and we'll get into that later, but it does become it is a key moment for her, and it's her sort of most recent heartbreak. But she is like almost immediately, after confiding in Auntie Anne, about kind of what happened in Halifax, in Hastings, her aunt kind of like tries to wing woman her, kind of like tries to cheer her up with.
There's another lady around here. Hold on one second.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, her aunt is basically trying to say, like,
Veer
Hobart didn't work out, but Ann Walker's this really nice girl that you could maybe occupy your time with. I don't know if she meant it that much, but she definitely knew that somebody like that might cheer Ann up.
She's trying to set her up with a rebound.
Yeah,
the ultimate rebound, as we learn from history, it sticks. It's good. So then we move on, and we are introduced again to Ann Walker, but for the first time in the sort of context of her world. This beautiful house. Yeah. We get it's a very strong, like, gilded cage sort of visual metaphor. She's her being examined by her doctor, and just is staring into the middle distance with, like, this sort of bored melancholy while this straight man tries to, like, flirt with her. And I was like, whoa, I feel so seen.
Yeah.
You relate to Ann Lister quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't get that doesn't make sense to me. That's never happened.
Sophie Rundle's bored, indifferent stare when men try to flirt with her, I'm like, whew.
Yeah.
I felt like a chill run down my spine. I was like looking in the mirror. But basically, we get the backstory of her family, that they're like, oh, she's, very sickly and very ill, but she is kind of the sole heir to her fortune at this point, with her sister married and up in Scotland. She's the only one down in Halifax, and she, her brothers have died. Her parents died within a very short time span. Her brother went abroad, I think, on his honeymoon.
Yeah, he died
in a freak way.
That rough time, bro.
Yeah, I know. And then I'm like...
And her parents died within a few months of each other. And obviously, I read some more on her in the Gentleman Jack book, that her father was not a nice man. He was, I don't know if he physically abusive, but he was just not a good man. He was he was not nice to them. So she had a really rough childhood. Ann Walker's life is incredibly sad. Yeah. And Ann Lister was kind of the 6 to 8 years of happiness she ever really felt. So it's like, Ann Walker's story is really tragic if you get into it. But I mean, Ann Lister really did kind of save her life.
Yeah. And in this moment, they're like, she has a weak spine, which I'm like, I wonder, because like a lot of Victorian, not even Victorian, I keep doing Victorian, and it's very Georgian.
We're in the Georgian like Regency.
We're like 10 or 15 years away from the Victorian age. Yeah. But the fashion always confuses me because it looks so close. But the thing about the 19th century is, like, a lot of medicine was conflated. The body was conflated with, your mental and spiritual health. Like, this was the time when phrenology was a thing, where it's like, I can feel the bumps on your head and tell you if you're going to be a sociopath or, like, a hero or save a life. Like, it was, like, palm reading, but for the skull. So it's like, when they say she has, like, a weak spine, it's like, we don't ever, throughout the course of the series, actually see, like, her be like, oh, my back, sort of thing. Yeah. But it's conflated with, like, oh, you have a disposition to, like, a lot of emotional breakdowns and things of that nature, which they do kind of mention throughout her being very, I forget the term that they use, but, just like, feeling poorly, and they kind of treat, and they call her an invalid. They talk about her as if she's not in the room, which is, like, very, like, gross and ableist and sad for her, and like I feel sad for her. And it's like they talk about her, the doctor and her aunt. Yes, that's her aunt. Yeah, talking about her, and she's like there and being like, oh, the tragic story of her parents. She's the sole heir. We have to keep these fortune hunters away from her, presumably suitors.
It's really good exposition that is framed as, but you're getting exposition, which is really hard to do right with screenwriting props to Sally Wainwright.
Yeah.
You get this beautiful exposition of these two characters, but also you're really setting up the contrast and their separate need for each other in their lives.
Yeah.
You're really seeing that kind of come together.
I will say the moment that it's like, well, you know, the doctor finishes flirting / examining her, which is like the worst combination that there could be from a male doctor. But he is like, well, I don't see anything wrong with her, you know, physically. Turns to the aunt and it's like, you know, maybe she could do with getting out more or like having a little bit of adventure. And then we cut back to Shibden Hall, and that I'm like, what a segue.
This show has really, and we'll get into this more, really fantastic cinematography and editing that
Gorgeous.
Just aids the already incredible story and script written by Sally Wainwright. So there's just a lot. We could spend a whole podcast just talking about that, and that's something we're going to get into in each podcast is kind of the cinematography choices and such. But these really powerful editing moments where it's just like you're literally answering the question that was just asked with like another scene that's happening, and a really beautiful contrast between the two people and their personalities. Yeah,
absolutely. And then now we get into, I guess, the third subplot, I suppose, of the show where Anne is like looking for ways to make money, and she's like, Cole's super hot right now. And she hires a new, you know, financial manager who is character Washington, who we see a bit more of throughout the series. And he's like, well, you know, you have these coal mines. You should do more, you know, first of all, you should do more with them than what you're doing. I think you should sink your own pits. However, the people that you've hired to do the work for you are 110% stealing your coal. Yeah. And she's like, oh, for real? And he's like, yeah, they definitely are.
I don't know so much of a financial manager as kind of the one like helping her run her estate. He's kind of like her business manager.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but the people that she's been working with, the Rawson brothers, who turn out to be somewhat distant cousins of Anne Walker, which we'll get into in another episode when that's a bigger plot point. He's kind of like, well, I don't want to speak ill of them. I know them socially. And she's like, I do know them socially. Say what you need to say, basically. Yeah. And he's like, they're 100% like not trustworthy guys, but obviously no one will say anything about it because Christopher Rawson is a magistrate and is like
magistrate of the county
and one of the wealthier.
He's also owns the bank. Like he has a lot of
hands in a lot of different pots.
He can basically get away. He thought he was above the law, basically.
Oh, 100%. And so basically she gets interested in the idea of getting into coal. Her dad is very much against it. But she's like, I think this is the future. I think this is worth doing. So that sets up that plot line, which we'll get into as we go down the road. But then we get a visit from Mariana.
Oh, yeah, that happens.
Yes.
And you may get a little backstory.
Yes, go for it.
So Mariana Lawton, what is considered, even though how the show ends framed, the love of Anne Lister's life. She met her 17 years prior to this. She was introduced to her by her friend Tib Norcliffe.
Tib is like the gayest name you could have in the 19th century.
Well, it's not her real name. It's just what Anne called her. It was like her nickname.
My point still stands.
But I can't. I'm not sure of her name right now. But Tib introduced them to her, and Tib and Anne had a thing. But they were both like two tops and two aggressive people, so it like didn't work out. So, but she introduced her to Mariana, and then they started an affair, which Tib kind of regretted doing later.
Oh, yeah.
She was like, oh, man.
It's like the friend who sets up two friends, and then they have this on and off thing that you are always having to hear about from both of them.
Well, also, Tib had, like, feelings for Anne, too.
Oh, interesting.
But Tib drank too much, so Anne didn't ever want to, like, commit to her.
Oh, well.
Yeah. There's, like, it's so many stories. Anyway, her and Mariana meet. They fall, like, crazy in love with each other. They get married. Like sacrament, like ring stuff, but then
married in their own private
how
ceremony.
She kind of does
yes,
the end. I think it was more private though than what she does with Anne Walker. But then Mariana gets married to Charles Lawton, who's this really old guy. Her name was Mariana Belcom, by the way, before. But she became Mariana Lawton. She married this really old guy named Charles. For
financial
and
security.
financial stuff because she was a woman. All the money in her family was tied up. You know, her brother. It didn't go to her. She was basically going to be left penniless when her family died off. And she didn't have a husband. Yeah. So she marries this guy. Anne's heartbroken. That's why she starts wearing black. She starts wearing black
she does
because of Mariana
every
Lawton,
episode.
and she has worn black for like 17 years. But they were like madly in love. And even though she got married, her and Mariana still hooked up on occasion. Ann Lister got an STI because of Mariana, because her husband, Charles Lawton, like slept with like a maid or something, got an STI from her, then gave it to Mariana, who gave it to Ann, and she had to deal on and off with like that venereal disease like for the rest of her life. It was messy. But here we are now. Mariana's written to Ann, and this is how they kind of like had their hookups. Yeah. It was Mariana coming home to Lawton Hall. She'd stop by Ann's, Ann would stop by the Lawtons. They'd screw, and then they would leave each other. It was very much just like, we can't spend a lot of time together for appearances because you're married, but like, and it was fine. Her husband knew too, which we get an allusion to in a later episode. He knew. Oh yeah. Yeah, and it was just kind of like
100%.
I can't do anything about it, and I don't,
But also, he's not that invested because he's also out there cheating on her.
Yeah.
And it's also not with another man, so there's not like, oh, I'm being
it's not
cuckolded in the same way, or like I don't have to worry about my wife having another man's kid that I'm responsible for. So
basically, Mariana rolls up. She says, "Hey, Freddie," which is like, to me, is like it's sweet, but it's like kind of kinky too. Because that is how I read it, and that's how my brain works. But it is kind of like she's calling her like, because the way sex was talked about, there's the man and there's the woman. Well, Anne was a top. She was the aggressor. Yeah. She was the giver. So she was like her Freddie, like her. Yeah. It's like calling a lesbian a Jack back then. It was very similar. So for her, it's like this kind of kinky nickname, but also I've seen the flip argument that it's also offensive because it's kind of like making fun of her masculinity, which Anne, struggled with being misgendered. Misgendered.
Quite a bit.
So Mariana's here, and then they have the dinner party, and the favorite move of the whole series is for Mariana.
I just noticed this today when we were watching it together, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's like Mariana gives her like the bedroom eyes, and it's like, oh, they're gonna.
She's holding a glass. Like, if you go back and watch the scene. The way Sharon Jones is holding a glass, and like taps it with two fingers.
She like kind of like fingers the glass, and it's like.
And I was like,
there's a really good clip
from HBO. Even for HBO, I was like,
there's a really good clip from Gogglebox, which is like a British reaction show, and they reacted to this scene, and it was like all straight people. And there was like, everybody was like, oh, they're about to like finger bang, and they're about to like do it. Yeah. I'm trying to not say the F word.
We don't have to, but also it's pretty explicit.
I know.
They're about to be close.
Yeah, they're about to know each other in the biblical sense.
Yes, there we go. It was just I like that as a euphemism for this podcast.
It was so clear, and you could tell Mariana's come there just to like get some, and she's like ready to go, and Anne's like
holding out for this person like, to a certain degree.
I know, but she's also like, I mean, she's happy to. Ann Lister loves sex, so she wasn't going to say no. But we learned later that it was, it was in the script, which I can pull up. The script said Anne and Mariana are having sex. It's good sex, but instead of passion, it's perfunctory.
Oh,
so it's more just like, it's good. They're both getting off, but it's not really like passionate like love making. It's just like, we both
it's like a heat of the moment. We have an opportunity. Yeah, and it's like a safe person you can do this
with.
We
both haven't like had an orgasm. Well, analysts do, but we haven't had like sex in a long
or intimacy.
time.
But it's also it's like you think about, you can't just like rebound. You can't just be around and find your next person. Like in this is a very small. Yeah. Everyone is closeted community, so it's the sort of thing where it's like there's certain people that she has years and years of like emotional intimacy invested in.
Oh yeah, and she'd written in the journal one time where she had like slept with Tib in the interim one time when she was with Mariana, and she was like, she wrote in her journal after her and Tib finished having sex that she was like, I can never feel the passion with anybody else except Mariana. Mariana and I have this passionate connection, and me and Tib, we just can't like it'd taken both of them a long time to to finish, and she was just saying like, I could only feel real passion with Mariana basically.
But it's also the sort of thing where it's like we see for the first time the cracks in their relationship of like why they didn't work out, and it was the sort of when they're they're in bed together, they finish their intimate moment, and rolls over, writes in the journal like quick notes so she can like report back later. And I was
no, she after sex she'd roll over if she was at home. Yeah, roll over, write down what time it was, how many orgasms each person had, And then she would like, finish the entry later, but that was like the immediate.
Nerd.
And then there's the classic finger wipe, which I appreciate. It's just like that's practical.
Every queer woman podcast has talked for like, there was one I was doing a smooth 10 minutes on the finger wipe.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay. But they, when they're talking to her, she's like, oh, why don't you just marry a man? And that way, you can have even more financial security. And Anne is immediately just shuts it down. She's like, don't even.
She's like, have we met?
It would be, yeah, it's like, yeah, do you know me at all? But also, it's like, it would be genuinely ridiculous for me to marry a man. Like, she is someone who has so known herself for so long.
Yeah.
And she's like, this is, not only should I not have to hide, like, I can't. Yeah. I can't do this. And, Mariana is very much like, oh, well, and she kind of like negs her a little bit a couple times as she's talking about it. She's like, oh, I'm the only one who will, like, who else will have you but me? Yeah. And I mean, the answer to that question is Anne Walker. Yeah. But it's it's a moment where we see, and we'll see it later when we see more of Mariana, that this jealousy, this possessiveness, even though Mariana was the one to choose to leave, or who felt that she had no choice but to get married.
Yeah.
But it is a sort of it is the sort of thing where you see a sort of toxicity and a sort of negativity that she is not afraid to like.
Yeah, it's proven that their relationship is like
it's dysfunctional. Yeah.
And that's really kind of Mariana's fault. But anyway.
So we move ahead to Mariana leaves. And then
we didn't even see her leave. She just like rolls. She's like, because Mariana's like, "Are we gonna do this?" Like, because they just went once, but she's like ready to go at it all night because she knows she's not gonna get any for a while. Yeah, she's like, "Are we gonna do this?" And just like, and then you just leave me in the morning, which is like, it's sad. Yeah. And so they roll over and go to sleep. But yeah, there's some really beautiful moments, and there was a cutout scene in that scene where Mariana's talking to her, where it flashed back. It's in the script. Flashback to when she was a kid, and she asked her dad to like give her some money to go live like as a man in Europe for a year, and he was like, I'll think about it. And then while he was thinking about it, he locked her in her room and she couldn't get out, so she climbed out the window and up the roof. And it's like the scene where her parents are trying to get her to come down. Her mom was like an infamous drunk. So she was drunk and yelling at her. And Lester's mom was like infamous drunk. Okay. Was like drunk yelling at her. Dad was like, get down, she's impossible. Marian was like crying. Aww. And, get her down. But it showed just how difficult of a time she had growing up, just like struggling with who she was. And not her struggling, but struggling to fit in this world. Yeah.
Which we see different people in her life having more acceptance for that than others. Like her dad just sort of stepping out of it entirely, but still kind of like alluding to her like her like sort of butchness at times, and just kind of not really shying away from that. But then you have her Auntie Anne, who the one person she confides in, and Marian kind of falls in between. Yeah,
and she's still, even with her, like is holds a little bit back though. Absolutely,
she's kind of giving her the top level overview of like, I wanted to marry her, it didn't work out, sort of thing of Veer Hobart. And we get the feeling that she kind of gets the big picture thing from this. And whereas Marian does not get these details, but Marian 100%, I think, knows more than is given to her, So then we finally get to the moment we've all been waiting for, where the lesbians, as I like to call them as a collective unit, meet. So basically, Anne Walker returns the visit, which is a very like 19th century thing of like, someone visits you have to go visit them back at their house, back and forth. Yeah. They come over for like a social call / sort of dinner. Mm-hmm. And they actually get into a political debate. She comes in, and Marian and Walker are kind of like talking politics of the day and talking about like the benefits and drawbacks of universal male suffrage. Mm-hmm. And they're like, have you voted? And she's like, no, of course not. Obviously I can't vote, but there's nothing explicit. It says landowners can, and I am a landowner. Yeah. So theoretically I could, but to give universal male suffrage, I never will.
That Anne's aunt was with her for this?
Who? Wait, sorry?
When you said Anne.
Oh, Marian. I was saying she's.
So when Marian. You said Anne came to visit, did you say who she came with?
Oh, no. Okay, so she came with her aunt, and she came with that weird doctor.
No, that's not her aunt. That's her cousin.
Who's this, then? Look, let me tell you, all the older women on the show who were, like, the worst clothes. Look,
So
I cannot keep them together. Oh,
I'll do
and
this.
her, yes.
Anne and her cousins, Mrs. Priestley, who
Not
at
Miranda
this
Priestley.
point, at this point, Eliza Priestley, we stand at this moment, but that's about to change. And then Doctor Who is there. Peter Davison plays Mr. Priestley. Peter Davison was, can't remember what number, but it was the one with like the celery stick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, little fan. His daughter played the Doctor's daughter in an episode of Doctor Who with David Tennant, who was also the Doctor.
Yes, and then they got married.
They got married. So,
and then they have a daughter.
Yeah.
Doctor's daughter.
I know, like, the Doctor's daughter really married the Doctor.
Yes.
And it's all this information. But yeah, the Doctor Who and Mrs.
Galaxy
Priestley
brain.
are there. And they take Anne to visit Anne Walker. And then we get the best meeting scene, which is them... Because Anne is literally, I love it. She's upstairs talking to her aunt, and she's like, they were dull and boring the last time I met them.
Yeah. And also,
and then she comes downstairs.
Anne Walker was like a literal child.
Yeah, it was like 10 something years ago. She was like 18 or 19.
Yeah, and so it's like, yeah, of course she's not interesting. She has not, she's like an 18, 19-year-old who knows nothing of the world and has not been allowed to go anywhere or do anything.
Yeah.
Because people are worried about her fortune and everyone is worried that she's going to die. So I'm like, there are plenty of fascinating 18, 19-year-olds, I'm sure, in the world, but like Anne Walker would not have had the opportunity at this point to be one of them.
And then she comes downstairs and it's just, she says that, I think she sees Anne Walker and she's like, oh, she's not a little girl anymore. And she's kind of like, she gives her like love it down.
Pleasantly surprised.
And like Anne Walker's just kind of like, you know, kind of like breathless almost. And it is in the script, it said like the two women realized this was more than just like a hello.
Aww.
Like it was kind of like their like, oh moment. And then they, you know, they start almost having like a flirtation right then and there.
Oh, immediately. And like Anne gets, Anne Lister gets the creepy doctor who for whatever reason is there with them to like leave. It's like, oh, go look at our sick horse or something.
He was there to look after her aunt because she was yeah.
And then as soon as he leaves, Anne Lister kind of looks at Anne Walker, you know, conspiratorially and was like, such a weird guy.
Yeah.
And Anne Walker's like, thank you. Like, one, thank you for getting rid of him. But also, she's like sitting on the arm of the chair beside her or like immediately beside her and like kind of has her arm like closed, not over her shoulder, but like closed. And like Anne Walker just looks the most joyful that we see her look in this pilot episode.
Yeah, her whole demeanor and countenance just changes when Anne Lister's around, which is, you know, important for anybody that's, you know, looking for somebody. If somebody makes you feel that way, it's usually a pretty good sign.
Yeah, but it also it's a conversation where we see Anne like being condescending bigger sister as his older sister and somewhat guilty of this, where Marian's trying to be like, oh, you know, this wouldn't be so bad for like more people to vote. And she's like, yeah, but then I can't vote as a landowner. Why should my tenants be able to vote before me? Which I'm like, it's interesting because it complicates her in the sense that like we think of her as this super progressive figure, whereas she, you know, is like, no, my land makes me a higher quality person than, you know, the people who work it, you know. So, and it's interesting to see her, you know, be progressive in this one front and then be like, okay, let me look at coal and what that can do with, obviously we're getting towards the Industrial Revolution. Around thereabouts. So it's like, so she's looking forward in certain ways, but also looking back and also like kind of coveting the, you know, privilege of like men because she's so close to that. And so in the fact that she's independent and she can travel.
Well, she's very much in with the men too because she's a landowner. She is in with them. Yeah. And she's basically the boss of a lot of men.
100%.
And then also too, they didn't do it in the show as much, but I know Sally Brand when I talked about season 2, things got more tumultuous between like the working class and the rich. There was a lot of reform stuff going on and it got more tense, especially in the Halifax area. They did have a protest scene, and Choma, however you say it, put a video on Instagram of the protest scene they filmed, but then it didn't make the show. So it was like behind the scenes, it was like a protest and like King George and like effigy and stuff. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, because he had to kind of like acquiesce like some power to the working class.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we get more into that, and it gets really tense. And Halifax is kind of a tumultuous place, so I think that's really going to play a big part in like some of the B and C story stuff of season 2.
It does, and also B and C story stuff in this season, which we'll get to when we talk to Bad Dad Souden.
Yeah, Bad Dad
a bit
Souden.
More. But yeah, so that kind of brings us towards the end of the episode. They, you know, Anne Walker and her family leave. And then you just see Anne kind of like look after her and kind of ends on, I shall endeavor to make her my wife. And it's very interesting. It's like not out of like, oh, I see this woman and I'm just in love with her at first. I was like, she's good looking, you know, and she's like of clearly status and stuff, but like it's 100% like, I make this woman my wife, because like one is a challenge, and Anne is absolutely someone who like lives for the challenge.
Oh yeah,
of, like,
every good lesbian loves like a night, the chase. It's fun.
The conquer it. Yeah,
Anne Lister loves the chase because it's thrilling. Yeah, especially back then when you didn't know if somebody, there was no indicator if somebody was gay or not.
No,
it was just
absolutely.
like the thrill of the chase.
But then it's also like this fortune. So and she very much steps into the place of like a lot of like the suitors of the time, where it's like a woman who's like gorgeous, single, most of her family's dead, so there's no one I have to like answer to or negotiate with, and like full of money, like has like the biggest house. Like at one point she's like, you know, how many acres you got? And like literally Anne has to sit and think about it. She's like, so many, you can, and she like graciously is not trying to actually assess how much money Crow Nest is, or how much land Crow Nest is.
Well, you get a good idea how rich she is because she can't remember, because it's so much. And also too, she was proving a point with the vote, saying, look how silly it is that you can't vote, and look, you have so many you can't even remember.
Exactly.
And you don't have a right to vote as a landowner. Exactly.
So, and we basically end on her, sort of Anne's mission for the arc of series 1 is, I'm going to make her my wife.
Yeah, she goes to Crow Nest to see her. She's strutting up that path with her cane and top hat and swatting around.
Just like power walking, and it's a gorgeous the greenery.
I love when she rings the doorbell and she just like gently like taps her hat up with her cane.
It's so cheeky.
And there's such a good deleted scene that the BBC left in when she goes in. James is going to tell Miss Walker she's there, and she's like checking herself in the mirror and like making sure she looks good, and is like straightening herself.
Oh, that's cute. I wish that had been left.
Yeah, it's in the BBC version. You can probably find it on YouTube somewhere, but it was like a really nice touch that she does kind of care what this woman thinks about her, which would have been a nice thing, because at this point, she did go, I've heard some people comment on it, like from upstairs in her aunt's bedroom being like, I don't even want to deal with her too. Wonder I should marry her. Yeah. That's so gay. It's like from 0 to 60 like that, with like, I'm not interested. Well, maybe I am. Yeah. And then like, let's get married. So
it's very much like that TikTok of the no. Yeah. Well,
yeah. No, somebody did that. Kombucha lady.
Yes,
it was literally that meme. Somebody did that meme. It was like it was two roles like, Anne Lister, will you marry me? And it was like, Anne Walker. Yep.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And every time.
Yeah.
Every time. That is like my favorite thing on the internet at the moment. But yeah, so basically that brings us to the end of the first episode. And we briefly kind of both touch on the moments that told us on the series. Mine was that amazing title sequence, like the likes of which, like, Game of Thrones obviously has, you know, which recently just ended, like, obviously one of the most recognizable like scores and most recognizable title sequences, but like HBO has always come through with like a really nice, like you think about Big Little Lies has a nice one. Yeah, my favorite is True Blood.
It's just too long.
It is too long.
I like this song, but it's so long though. I can't do it.
But the Southern Gothic like aesthetic is so fun. The first time I watched it, I was like riveted. So yeah, the moment that sold me on the series was 100% that title sequence. That was the moment with the music and the, you know, the tying of the cravat, the like each step of which is very simple. It's kind of like Dexter's title sequence, where it's like it's giving you insight to the world by like fragments, and it's, I don't know, I personally loved it.
Yeah, my moment that sold me was just these like tiny little moments of queerness that I was like, that's me. And this attention to detail is what sold me. It's more than just one moment. It's just those tiny moments and attention to detail of that Anne has, just like climbing over the wall. That I was just these like moments of queerness, of checking herself, stuff, which comes out more in 2 and 3. But it's just these moments of like queerness that are so relatable.
Yeah,
that's what sold me. And then we're getting to favorite frame of the episode.
Oh yeah, so these are like reoccurring segments that you know, we looked ahead. We're like, this is a thing that every episode we want to talk about. Favorite frame, which we will share to our Instagram at Jack the Last Pod.
Favorite bit of dialogue and costume prop of the episode.
Yes,
as well.
Yes. So favorite frame for me was the scene of her flipping through her journals by that single pane of or by the window, and like that white light coming through, and it's just like on her face and on the journal, which is like what we have of her. And it's like, but it's also like the symbolism of like, this is her legacy, and this is a legacy, a huge thing in the grand history of like Western queerness as we know it. You know what I mean? Like, she's credited, it's considered like the first like modern, quote unquote, modern lesbian, which like, who knows really what that means? But in the sense that like, this is a historical figure that married a woman, or not in the obvious legal sense, but also who was entirely like, who very much like, was like, I'm a woman, I love and I only love the fair sex.
Yeah.
And who recorded, you know, her different encounters with women, but also like her feelings about herself as a queer person.
Yeah. For me, it was when she was, it's kind of a hard one, but it's when she was, the frame is more of a transition than a frame. I don't know. It's two things for me. One, and they're both with Vera Hobart, when she is walking down, where it cuts to her in Shibden, and then she's walking down the stairs in Hastings, and it goes from like the darkness of Shibden to this light, and you can see the ocean in the background because Hastings is on the coast. It's this beautiful shot, and it's so contrasted. That's one of them, and then also for me too, when Eugenie's doing her hair, and she kind of like, the camera pans around, like kind of pans around her, and then it seamlessly fades into her. And
yes, that's a good transition.
So those two for me are really important. It just shows like beautiful contrast, and just like the beautiful way that the show uses flashbacks as well.
Absolutely.
So for me, costume and property episode, I have to give it to. I have to do Ann Lister's cane.
Oh yeah.
The pimp cane.
Oh yeah. That is.
Just the way she used it to, like, tip her hat up. It's just, like, this confidence. And she was, like, spinning around because she knew she was, like, going to, like, court this girl that she had a pretty good idea that she'd probably get somewhere with.
She uses a cane exactly how you would imagine, like, Oscar Wilde would use a cane. You know what I mean? It's just so confident. It's part of her wardrobe. It is, like, a part of her and how she moves through the world, and I love it. But also, my prop, I also picked the journal as like my prop and my frame. But I'm like, that top hat and the cane are just like such like key aspects of like how, obviously not quite necessarily how she would have historically been styled, right?
Yeah, they did a lot of agency with that. They took some stuff from her hair and like the pin and stuff that was seen in a picture of her, but a lot of that, they just, the top, she wore a hat. We don't know if it was a top hat. They just chose the top hat.
And they wanted to code her in a way that like a contemporary audience would be like, oh, this looks like how we would understand a masculine twist on like a dress.
Yeah, and we knew she wore like breeches, like men's drawers. We knew she wore like vests and cravats. Like they knew that, but it was just like the specifics of we're not sure.
And like who knows how she did her hair every single day. Like versus like the one portrait, a couple portraits that we have of her. But yeah, so that I believe, and favorite bit of dialogue, what was yours? Mine was I said earlier, the doctor's bit of like a bit of adventure. And I'm like, oh,
let me think.
What was
in episode 1? Oh, it's when she's in bed with Marian, and Mariana's telling her like, you know, if you can find somebody that would make a conspicuous commitment to you, then that would be a very special person indeed. Which is a beautiful foreshadowing to what's going to happen with Anne Walker.
Yes.
That's such a good one.
I love it. There's no better place to end than that.
Yeah.
So,
thank you guys for listening.
Yes. Thank you for joining us on our first episode.
Yeah, thank you for listening. We have had a lot of fun. Join us here this time next week for episode 2. And we will see you guys later.
Yes, don't forget to follow us on @JackTheLastPod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you here this time next week for a brand new episode of Jack the Last Pod. See ya. Bye.
Stay gay. Cut that.
It literally just cut off.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you guys again for listening. If you want to know more about the podcast, please follow us online on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter @JackTheLastPod, and our website is jackthelastpod.com. Jack the Last, the podcast, is a That Hipster Kid production, produced, edited, and narrated by Kelsey P. Jones.
And Carrie Kears.
Music is by Epidemic Sound.